Hello, this is Randy Smith with Vicinity Manufacturing. I wanted to take just a couple of minutes to walk through the process of using Excel pivot tables with Vicinity data, as well as, for that matter, Dynamics data. I'm going to just open up Excel on my system and create a new workbook. There's nothing magical to this part of it. And I'm going to create what's called a pivot table, which allows me to analyze data from Vicinity. I'm going to put it in this workbook. Now, there's really two pieces to this conversation. One is actually connecting to the database, and the other part is the actual creation or working with a pivot table. Let me start by connecting to the database. I typically like to start there. So you go to the data area, and then I just go to from other sources. You'll find that after you use the application or use pivot tables more, you could use existing connections as well. So I'm going to say from SQL Server. There are other options you have here, but the one that we use is from SQL Server. And specifically, it's going to ask you for the name of the SQL Server. Normally, that's going to be a server name. In my case, I'm running off of my own machine called Randy Surface. I have Windows authentication activated on my SQL Server. In other words, how I log into my network allows me to get to my database. That probably is the case for you as well. You could also have use a specific username and password. This would be a SQL user. You can check in with us. We'll be happy to give you some idea on how your system might be set up. But try use Windows authentication first, and then you may have to go to a specific SQL Server name. Just press the next button, and what it's going to do is connect to the database, and this drop down will show the various databases that are out on that SQL server that we just discussed. If I navigate down, I'm going to go ahead and pick up my VIC demo, which is my demo database that I've got in my system. And it's allowing me to see my tables and or views. A table is just that. It's a physical table in the database, and a view is a logical table. In other words, it's where somebody has joined tables together on your behalf. So you could either navigate through the Vicinity tables, look like this, and they look a lot like the screen names. And then we also have got some views that are already set up there. These are used for Vicinity View. The VV underscore means Vicinity View. So these are the data connections that Vicinity View is using. For this demo purpose, I'm just going to go in and grab my batch yield, which is basically looking at ops closed batches and picking up some kind of header information about about that batch. You could go next and then finish, or just finish from the previous screen. Now I'm going to tell the system that I want to create a pivot table. I could have just dropped all the data in my database, in my spreadsheet if I wanted to, but I'm going to go ahead and say create a pivot table for me and just say OK to this. Now on the right hand side, this is where I'm seeing the fields that were just read from the database. And I can work with these quadrants. I'm going to focus our attention on the rows, the columns, and the values. We are now connected to the SQL database. You're done with basically the first step, which was connecting to the database. So the next piece we're going to do is let's go ahead and just tell the system we want to analyze our formulas. So if I drag and drop my formulas into the rows, I see all my formulas that I've ever made a batch ticket for in my database. That's what we see here. I'm also going to say I want to analyze this by facility, in other words, by production location. So I've got a couple of different production locations out here. It looks like I've got 3 at this point. I think one of those is a trial anyway. So I've got my facilities already dropping in place. And let's assume that the intersection of that, I want to be able to show the, say, the weight produced. I would just grab and drag and drop that number. I now have a view of all formulas, all the weight of product coming out of every batch that I've processed. Now there's a lot of different ways that I can analyze this further, etc., but we'll just keep it kind of simple for the second. Here are my formulas that I've got, and here are my facilities. I have ability to format this information, so I'm just going to go to this value field setting, and I'll go to the number format and just go ahead and select the number formatting. And I'll go ahead and use my comma separator. So now this gets a lot easier to deal with and to view. So what I've got now is I've got what's called a pivot table. It allows me to analyze my data, and it dynamically creates rows and columns and puts the data in between. And I've got all the formatting capability. One piece that I did want to kind of show you is a what's referred to as a timeline. When we're dealing with dates like I am right now, it might be helpful to add a timeline so that I don't have to look at all of my data. So for example, it has just analyzed all the data I've got, and I've got batches going back to January of 2007 all the way out into 2015. I can actually use this and change my units of measure. So I could say, just let me just look at years for a second. What I want to show here is how I can dynamically change the view of my data. So what I've just done is I've now said only look at batches within this time period. I could even get more specific than that, come down into quarters and say I'm only interested in those quarters. And as I change these values, you're not really going to see much on my formulas and my facilities, but you will see the numbers changing. So it went from 84,000 down to 17,000 as an example. So this is a good way to kind of cut up the data and see what's going on. So that's about as far as I want to go with pivot tables. What I want to show you is that connecting to a database isn't as difficult as you might think. Also, once you get the data in, a pivot table can be really helpful. And the pivot table is showing you dynamic data, columns and rows that you can define in the intersection that you can control. Know that your next step on this would be pivot charts. So I could take this and turn this into a graph rather easily. But I'll leave that up to you. There's plenty of videos out on the internet and up in YouTube to kind of walking you through that process. If there's anything we can do at Vicinity to help you get your hands around this data better, we'd be happy to help.